All right. So I hope you're ready because we are about to do a huge deep dive into liquid templating. You're going to learn how it works, when to use it, what's possible, and so much more in this lesson. So stay put. This is going to be an in-depth one. This is going to be a beefy lesson. So get out your notepad, get ready to take some notes because we're about to jump headfirst into all things liquid as it relates to ConvertKit. So if you've ever sent an email with ConvertKit and you've wanted to include something as simple as somebody's first name in that email, you've probably used Liquid. You might have used it by clicking the little personalize button in the email editor, but you've used Liquid whether you've written the actual Liquid code or not. Liquid, when used correctly and when used to its full capacity, can do so much. It can add bits of data or content to an email like a name or an upcoming webinar date or something like that. But it can also change the entire feel of an email that you're sending. You might want to swap out an example or a story or something, depending on the industry that somebody's in, or depending on what you know about them. Or maybe if they're already a customer, maybe you describe this thing differently to them than if they're not a customer. So you can do things like showing and hiding content depending on data that you have about somebody. But you can also transform data that you have about somebody or temporal data. So you can take somebody's name, let's say, and transform it, maybe capitalize it in the event that they made it all lowercase. Or you can take an upcoming webinar date and you can cast it in such a way that'll show the person on the receiving end, hey, it is, you're 4 days away from this webinar, even though you might be sending a similar sequence to somebody else. And they might be 5 days away from the webinar when they receive a different email. So there's so much you can do with Liquid. It's a little intimidating. I know that. So in this lesson, my goal is to not really cover the strategy. I'm not here in this lesson to talk through all the different ways that you could use Liquid. I'll be doing that throughout the rest of the course. But my goal here is really just to go over what Liquid is, how to understand it, what are the different filters that are available? What are the different options, control flow options that we can use? And by the end of this lesson, my goal is that you'll have a very clear understanding of how to use Liquid, how to write Liquid, so that later in the course, when I'm talking about ways to utilize Liquid, you won't be scratching your head and thinking, what the heck does this even mean? So when I talk to a lot of people about what Liquid is, there's a lot of confusion about it. A lot of people think that Liquid is a programming language. And especially if you're a marketer and you're not a coder and you're being told, hey, if you want to do this ConvertKit thing right, you need to write code. It makes people sort of shy away and kind of back themselves into a corner. And that's understandable because if you're not a coder, if you don't think like a developer, then you might really be put off by the idea of using Liquid to its full capacity. And so you end up kind of shying away. So Liquid came about. Shopify developed Liquid over a decade ago. I've been working with Liquid really since 2006, 2007. So it's been around for a while. The ConvertKit implementation of Liquid at the time of this recording is using version 2.6.3. So all that means to you and why I mentioned that is that the ConvertKit version of Liquid was released back in 2015. So it's a bit older. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just a little outdated. And what that means to you is that if you start to Google around for Liquid advice or you're looking at the official Liquid documentation on Shopify's site, it might be a bit outdated. You might see some functionality that is not actually possible in ConvertKit. So I want to make that clear that if you're trying to do different things and it's not working the way it should be, there's a very real chance it's because ConvertKit at this point in time is not using the most updated version of Liquid that Shopify has put out. Okay, so like I mentioned, Liquid is not programming. Instead, it's a markup language. It's a markup. It's a templating language. It's probably the better way of thinking about it. And I want to kind of talk about how Liquid gets processed or used by ConvertKit. So let's say you want to send out an email to 100 people. And just to keep things simple, let's imagine this email just says, hello world. There's no Liquid in it. It's just a very simple email going out to 100 people. What ConvertKit does is it takes that email content and then it wraps it with your email template that you're using for that broadcast. And then all it does is it sends that same thing to all 100 people with the only difference being that it's swapping out the to address. So this one might be to Bob at Gmail, this is to Jane at Gmail, this is to Mary at Gmail, and so on. So that's kind of what happens when you do static emails, when you're not really using any dynamic personalization or anything in your emails. But when you use Liquid, when you have an email that says hello subscriber.fname or first name, what's happening behind the scenes is ConvertKit is going to go through, say you have 100 people getting this email, the first person, and it's going to say, hey, find the subscriber object for them, meaning find the data that we have about them, and then bring back their first name and stick it in this email. So this will say, hello, Bob. And then subscriber 2, do the same thing. Hello, Mary. 3, hello, Jane, and so on and so forth. So that's what's happening behind the scenes is ConvertKit actually doesn't just bulk email out whatever you write. It will individually process every email that you've set up for every unique subscriber. So that gives you a lot of really interesting things that you can start to think about in terms of the power of dynamic personalization. So this could be something like maybe you have an email and this email might go out on Tuesday for this person, but Thursday for that person. What does that mean? Let's say they're all going to be going to this event on Monday. Well, the person on Thursday, we might say something differently about that Monday event than the person on Tuesday. And likewise, if this person is segmented in this way and their first name is Bob and so on and so forth, we can give them a very different email through the power of Liquid than the next person who might get that same email. But again, the content of that email will change. So that's what's happening behind the scenes. That's how ConvertKit handles Liquid. Now, there are some other ways that ConvertKit processes Liquid, which I'll talk about at the end of this lesson, namely things like when setting custom field data within an automation or something like that. But I'll cover that in a bit. So there are 3 kind of core components of Liquid that you need to be familiar with. I'm going to keep referencing these throughout this lesson and the rest of the course. The first is what's called Markup. So Markup is probably what you think of when you see Liquid. That is the curly brace, blah, curly brace stuff. And Markup has 2 different kind of variations, if you will. The first is called output markup. So output markup is curly brace. So that would be something like, say you have curly brace, subscriber.firstname, and curly brace. What output markup would do is replace that whole fragment of Liquid, and it'll come back with the person's first name and then stick that on. So it'll replace that Liquid with that first name. There's also tag markup. So tag markup is the ability to conditionally show content based on what's called the truthiness of a tag. And again, this is probably I'm trying to find a way to make this really sensical. But at this point, I'm just going to give you a kind of lay of the land, and then we'll dig into what all this stuff actually means later on in this lesson. But with tag markup, I want you to just realize that all that means is it's kind of like an if-else or if-then sort of thing. So if they have this tag, and I don't mean tag as in what I just said, but tag is in a ConvertKit tag, or if they have a custom field set to this value, then show these few paragraphs of text or something like that. So the next building block is what's called an object. So an object needs to be there. An object is going to be something like subscriber.firstname or now, or something that we can work with, either to find out if it's true, to show for tag markup, or to inject directly into the email. So it could be subscriber.city, it could be something like now, and then we're going to get a date representation of it in month, day, year, or something like that. That is the object that within Liquid gets emitted back to an email. So we're going to replace this output markup with the value of an object, or we're going to see, is this object true? And if it's true, then the tag markups we have set up will show conditional content. So that's the second building block, objects. The third building block of Liquid are called filters. So have you ever taken a photo before? And again, this is really common these days, especially with Instagram and Lightroom and stuff like that. But if you've ever taken a filter and then post-processed it, so maybe you go in and you add a filter to it, or you do something like adjust the contrast or exposure or something like that. You're taking something raw and then processing it to make it ready for human consumption or something like that, right? That's how I want you to think about filters within Liquid. So let's say you're taking a raw first name, and this first name might be in lowercase or it might not be in lowercase, meaning I could go in and type in Mary with all lowercase, or I could type in Mary with capital M. We're not sure. But we want to make sure that whenever we show that first name field, that it's always capitalized correctly. So there are filters like capitalize that will let us modify this raw data, this raw first name field that we have, so that when we show it in an email, it can be formatted correctly. Or let's say we have a date, and this date is very system written, right? So it's year, month, day, and then time or something like that. Well, that's not really good. I wouldn't email you and say, hey, don't forget on 2019-11-5, we're going to do blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I wouldn't do that to you. Instead, I would say something like, hey, on November 5th of 2019, I'm going to be hosting this event, or maybe just November 5th. So with filters, we're able to post-process raw data in a way that makes it more ready and more consumable for an end user. Now, that's the common way of thinking about filters. And later on in this lesson, when I talk about filters more, I'll show you some examples of where filters aren't necessarily used to prettify something up for somebody reading it. But that's usually the normal or nominal way of using filters, are to make it so you're able to post-process something raw and make it ready to be read by an actual human. And another cool thing about filters, which I'll talk about later, is they can be chained together. So let's say you have a first name called Tom, and this could be, let's just pretend it's capital T-O-M. We can call the filter uppercase on it, which will give us capital T, capital O, capital M, and then we can call a subsequent filter called reverse on it, which will give us capital M, capital O, capital T. So you can chain different filters together. And now I'm going to give you a lot of examples of where this would be useful to make it so you can really, again, think of it like a photo. You can really make the final form exactly what you need for the purposes of an email, and to make this email super relevant and super personal to the person on the receiving end. All right, so now we're going to dive deep into output markup. So to refresh your memory, output markup, again, is just a markup that, when interpreted, will be replaced with content that's put into an email of yours. So typically speaking, again, this would be the first name of a subscriber. And more often than not, we're going to be working off a subscriber object. So usually when you see Liquid stuff, it's subscriber.tags or subscriber.firstname or subscriber.email address or something like that. And that's because the object, the main object that you'll be interacting with via Liquid, is the subscriber object. Now, the subscriber object isn't something that you'll ever just end with. It's always the starting point. So what ConvertKit does is, when you have a subscriber and you're sending an email to them, you have access to the following bits of information. So you have their email address, which is email_address. You have all other custom fields. So that could be first name, it could be last name if you have that, city, state, whatever you have stored. And you can find all this if you go to the subscriber profile page and just look on the left column. You can see all the different custom fields that you have for a subscriber. You can also get access to their ID. Now, you're probably not going to need this, but I just want to mention that ID is a property that they do expose to you via that subscriber object. And then finally, you have tags. So tags are a list or an array of all the different tags that somebody has applied to them. And this is usually more useful for things like when you're using tag markup to be able to conditionally show content. You'll say something like, if subscriber.tags contains customer, then show this paragraph of text. But for output markup, you're almost always just going to be dealing with custom field data. And again, the typical example that most people are familiar with is first name. So hello, first name. So when you have a subscriber object and you're working within Liquid, so you've done your two curly braces, now you type subscriber. To access a property, you're going to use a period. So subscriber.first_name. subscriber.last_name. If you've added custom fields with spaces, so let's say that you've created a new custom field and you've added it and called it favorite color, and you just typed in favorite space color. Behind the scenes, when ConvertKit actually exposes that to you via this subscriber object, it's actually called favorite_color, all lowercase. So this is something that trips people up because they try to they'll do something like subscriber.favorite space color. That actually breaks Liquid. So you want to make sure that you never have a space when referencing a custom field, or you don't really have any special characters. It's always lowercase, always underscores. So in my lesson on custom fields, I dive deeper into this and I talk about ways that you should set up custom fields and naming conventions and so on. So if you've gone through that already and you're following that lesson, then you're probably already in a good place. Okay, so outputting raw custom field data is often going to be fine. If you've gone through my lesson on glossary automations, then more often than not, for human readable stuff, you probably don't need to use filters because that's already been done for you in the glossary automation. But for the times when you need to transform raw data, and this could be data that is kept as a custom field, or it could be data about right now, then you're going to be using filters. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through all the different filters that are available to you within ConvertKit's Liquid implementation. Now remember, if you go to the Liquid documentation, the official documentation on Shopify's website, you're going to find more filters than the ones I'm going to cover right now. And that's because, again, the current version of Liquid 2.6.3 is a bit outdated. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's something wrong with ConvertKit. It just means that they haven't updated this yet. Should that get updated, I will re-record this section and add all the currently available filters. But for most of us, what I'm going to be covering right now is actually more than enough. You'll probably never touch 70% of what I'm going to cover a second from now. But my hope is that by looking at a few of these different filters, that maybe you'll start thinking, oh, I could see how I could use that. Or this could actually be really helpful for me, and I can use this to make this email campaign I want to write a little more relevant. So before I go through and list out and tell you about every filter available to you in ConvertKit, I want to start by talking about usage of filters. So the way that you use a filter is when you have an object, and again, this object could be a subscriber's first name, so subscriber.firstname. The way you call a filter is through using a pipe, or a vertical line is probably a better way of putting it. So you might have subscriber.first_name space pipe space downcase. And what that would do is that will take their first name and make it all lowercase. So we call it by using this pipe. Now, we can pass options or arguments into these filters. And the way we do that is if we want to say truncate. So truncate is a filter. If we want to truncate it by 10 characters, we would call, subscriber.firstname space pipe space truncate colon space 10. And what that would do is that will pass in the 10 argument or the 10 option into the truncate filter. So now we're going to be left with not that you'd ever have a first name probably with more than 10 characters, but in the event you did, this would be a first name that's cut off after showing 10 characters. You can also chain filters. So let's say you want to truncate it and then reverse it. I don't know why you would, but you would do subscriber.firstname space pipe space truncate colon 10 space pipe space reverse. And what that's doing, think of it as post-processing, right? You have your raw thing, the first name, you're now transforming it to only be 10 characters max. And then you're transforming it yet again. You're transforming not that original raw object, but the new one. And now you're reversing that. So what it does is every time you call a filter, whatever happened in the previous filter is now what's going to be modified with this subsequent filter. Hopefully that makes some sense. One thing I want to mention too is that if you're doing this stuff, if you're transforming and all this other stuff with filters, this actually isn't changing the underlying data. So you don't need to worry about this messing up the underlying data. Now, there are ways that you can use automations and setting custom fields within automations to update a custom field with a transformed value. So now that custom field is permanently going to have what it is you want in the format you want, but that's beyond the scope of this lesson, and I'll cover that later on in this course. All right, so the first filter I want you to say hi to is the size filter. You probably won't need to use this much, but what size does is it lets you get the amount of characters within an object. So let's say you want to find out how many letters are in somebody's first name. You could call subscriber.firstname space pipe space size, and that would give you the amount of characters in that person's name. I don't know when you'd ever want to call out somebody and say, hey, there are 15 letters in your first name and last name, congratulations, or something like that. But if you ever wanted to, then size is exactly how you would do that. But you can also use size on a list. So imagine that you have a list of purchase IDs on somebody's subscriber record. So maybe you have a purchases custom field, and then whenever somebody buys something, you append to that field. So maybe to keep it simple, you have A, comma, C, comma, D. This would mean that they've bought product A, product B, or product C and D from you, right? So 3 things. If you called size on that value, that original value, it's not going to give you back the right amount if you wanted to find out how many things that they bought because of all those commas. In a second, I'm going to introduce you to split, and split will let you turn that list, that comma separated list, into an array or into a list of objects that would have A, C, and D. And then if you called size on that, it would come back with 3. So if you wanted to do something like finding out how many things have they bought, and you're tracking in a custom field an array or a list of purchases, then size would give you that too. So you can use it to find the number of characters in a normal object. But if you use a filter to convert that object into a list or into an array, then you can call size on that and get back the total number of unique objects in that. Now say hello to downcase. So downcase, super simple. It lowercases text. Nothing more to say about that. Upcase. Huge prize goes to whoever can figure out what upcase does. You guessed it. It capitalizes all the letters in an object. So first name pipe upcase would make it my first name. If you want to shout at me, you want to shout my first name at me, upcase is your friend. And then there's capitalize. So capitalize will just upcase the first letter of an object. So let's say, again, you have a mixed bag of first names, and some people might have typed in their first name is all lowercase. Some people might have done it all uppercase. You never know how people are going to enter data. What you could do is you could do something like subscriber.firstname, space pipe, space downcase. So make it all lowercase, force it all to be lowercase. So this would make all the values you have for first names to be lowercase. And then you can call capitalize as another filter on top of that, which will then make that first letter capitalized. So imagine we have 3 Marys. First Mary typed it in fine. Mary with a capital M, good. Nothing would change. What gets outputted to her would be the same as what she typed in. But then let's say we have E. Cummings Mary, who likes all lowercase. So she types in Mary with no capital letters. So what will happen there is we'll downcase it, which means nothing will happen because it's still lowercase. But then we'll call capitalize, and that first letter, that M, will become a capital letter. And then we have Raging Mary, who typed in all caps Mary. For her, we'll make it lowercase, so we'll force it to be all lowercase. And then we'll call capitalize again. And now all 3 Marys have the same pleasant Mary with a capital M being outputted in an email. Next is escape. So escape is super helpful if you ever plan on passing data from a ConvertKit sent email onto a web page. So let's say that you're linking people to Typeform and you want to pass in the email address of that person. Now, if somebody opted into your list and put a plus in their email address, if you were to just link to Typeform and include, subscriber.email address, that plus would break things. So by calling escape, what that will do is that will encode that plus to make it browser friendly. So if you pass that data into a URL, you don't need to worry that that data will somehow break the URL or mess things up. So escape isn't really useful within ConvertKit itself, but should you want to start linking out of ConvertKit and passing data from ConvertKit to something else, then you're going to want to pay close attention to escape. And now we have Truncate, who I mentioned earlier. So Truncate will take some text in an object and truncate it down to however many characters that you'd like. So by default, what will happen, let's say you have ground control to Major Tom, and you truncate that down, it will say ground control to ... So truncation will add ellipses by default, which again are 3 periods. You can override that by passing in a secondary argument or a secondary option into truncate. So what you would do is you would say subscriber.favorite lyric pipe truncate : 10, comma, space, and then in quotes, you would type in ... or if you don't leave quotes, if you just leave 10, it'll default it to ... But then in those quotes, if you passed in that second argument, you could put and so on, or you could just put nothing, and then it would truncate it and leave it at that, no additional dots. Or you could say, and so on, or etc, or whatever you want. So you can pass in a custom way of showing ellipses. And then there's Truncate Words. So Truncate Words is similar to Truncate, except it'll never cut off a word ever. So the problem with Truncate is it doesn't care if you're on a space or if you're in the middle of a word, it will stop it there. So that's useful if you want to make sure it's never longer than this amount of characters or something like that. Truncate Words will always respect words based on spaces. So if you have a sentence with 10 words and you do Truncate Words and you pass in the argument of 3 or the option of 3, it will always only show the first 3 words and then it'll cut off the rest of the sentence. And again, by default, it'll put 3 dots, 3 ellipses, or you can override that and set your own option to be whatever you want. And then there's split. So split is a pretty powerful filter. And split is going to allow you to do something like split any object by whatever character you want, like a space or something like that. And that will convert that object, which came in as a string or as just characters, and it'll make it a list or an array. So let's say you have a name field, and the name is typically Brennan space Dunn. How would you get that last name? So what I would do is I would split the name field by space. So now I have a list with 2 objects, Brennan and Dunn. And then I would call last, which is a filter I'll show you in a second, and last would give me Dunn. So if I wanted the last name, the last thing that has a space before it, I would split it by space and then call last. And now I'm going to be given the last word in my name, which would be Dunn. Strip HTML will allow you to remove any HTML tags within data text that could get stored in a custom field. So this probably won't apply to most of you, but let's say you have a submission form and that submission form accepts rich text. So somebody maybe bolds text or something like that and then clicks submit, and you're taking that data and storing it within ConvertKit. Well, that bold text, which visually had text with some bold stuff on it, in your database, in your ConvertKit subscribe record, might end up with a little bracket B or bracket strong around it to show that this is bold. The problem is if you then inject that into an email, it might look odd. So strip HTML will remove any formatting or any markup that might have been passed along into your subscriber record. Join allows you to take a list or an array and to combine it into a set of characters or a string with whatever delimiter you want. So let's say you have, and again, this is probably something most of you probably won't ever touch, but let's say you somehow have a list of, red, green, blue. So 3 objects in that list. If you could call join on it with a comma space, and then that will give you red, comma, space, green, comma, space, blue, or the word and, red and green and blue. So if you want to be able to omit a list of whatever, delimited however you'd like, then join is going to let you do that. As a weird thought experiment, if you ever wanted to output to somebody their entire list of tags, you could go subscriber.tags, space pipe, space join, colon, space, quote, comma, space, quote. And what that would do is that will take that list of tags that they have on their record and then join them all with commas. So now you have a nice little thing that you could dump out somebody's full tag set to them. Again, I don't know why you'd ever do that. I've seen examples of that being used in creative ways for really expert level marketers who are doing some fun data permutation things. But again, for most of us, we probably will rarely use join. In some of the later lessons, I might touch on it, but for the most part, don't get too hung up on it and don't start thinking, how would I even use it? Because chances are you probably won't. So sort is pretty interesting. Sort, what that will do is that it will alphabetically sort a list or an array of objects. So remember back when I mentioned how we could store somebody's purchases in a custom field. So again, let's say that they go and they buy 4 things from you. They start with product C, and then they buy A, and then they buy B, and then they buy D. So in that purchases custom field, maybe you have, I forgot what the ordering was, but you have those 4 things listed. If you were to then call split on comma, so you call pipe split colon, quote, comma, quote, it will return back a list or an array of 4 things that are not alphabetically in order. Now, if you wanted to show somebody an alphabetical list of everything that they've bought, you could get that array or that list by calling split, and then you could call sort as a subsequent filter, so colon sort. And then, remember that thing I said you'd never use, join? Well, then you could call join there to string it back together with commas, so then I could send you an email saying, hey, you've bought A, B, C, and D from me. You're awesome, thank you, instead of showing it in the order that they've actually bought it. So reverse does what you'd expect it to do. It will just reverse whatever object you pass into it. So if you have Tom, the capital T, you call reverse on that, it'll come out as mot, M-O-T. You can also use reverse on a list or an array, which again, you can get to through splitting. So reverse, again, is not many probably practical uses, but it is there in the event you ever need to show somebody their name backwards. So replace is pretty cool. What replace lets you do is it will let you swap out text in an object with something else. So let's say you have a custom field and that custom field says, hello, mom. You could call replace, so pipe space replace colon space quote mom, what we're looking for. So the first option is what we're looking for, which in this case is mom, end quote, comma, space, quote, dad, which is what we want to swap out or replace it with, end quote. And what that will do is it will replace any version of the word mom with dad. So hello mom becomes hello dad. Replace first is identical to replace, same structure, same everything, except it will only replace the first occurrence of the word mom or the thing you're looking for. So if you have a custom field that says, hello, mom, I love you, mom, you're so cool, mom, it will then replace that with, hello, dad, I love you, mom, you're so cool, mom. So it will only change that first occurrence of the word mom. Remove is very similar to replace. You could actually use replace but with that second option of what you want it to replace with a blank string or nothing, to simulate remove. But all remove does is if you want to remove any instance of whatever word, so let's say you want to remove profanity or something like that, that could have ended up in your subscriber database, then remove would allow you to do that. Remove first, no surprise here, same as remove, only difference being it only removes the first occurrence of what it is you're looking for. Append lets you add content to the end of an object. So let's say your custom field says hello. You could call append with the option of and goodbye, which would give you hello and goodbye. Now you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just do some like subscriber.hello field end the liquid space and goodbye and do it that way? Well, that would typically be probably what you'd want to do. But if you ever want to be able to transform, like let's say you want to reverse hello and goodbye, this would be the way to do that, because then you could append and goodbye and then call reverse and then maybe upcase or whatever you want to do. If you need to do transforms on what you append to an object, then you'll want to use append. Otherwise, I'd keep it simple and just break out of liquid and then hard code within ConvertKit and goodbye and do it that way. Prepend, same deal, sticks it at the beginning of an object instead of the end of an object. Hey, so quick intermission before we get back to the lesson. Hope you're enjoying it. But this lesson comes from my full course, Mastering ConvertKit. If you are really enjoying what you're watching right now, you're going to love the full course. The full course is this and so much more. What you're watching is one lesson from the entire course. So we have, what I've put in this course is everything that you need to really master ConvertKit. So everything from how do you name your tags to how do you bring your list over if you haven't done that yet? How do you manage your data? So custom fields and the way you set up automations, rules, and so on. And it's prescriptive. So I talk about things that are it can veer on pretty advanced, but I'm focused on helping you do things like setting up a segmentation strategy and putting together an offer funnel, and then using progressive profiling techniques to better understand your audience. And then how can you faster grow your list through on-site personalization, on-site optimized offers, and so on, dynamic calls to actions. And then how do you onboard new subscribers? So I'll let you look at this full list. If you look below this video, there's a link to this page that I'm viewing right now. But if you really want to go in deep and you want to really build a great online automated business that is profitable, that converts well, and that is really just self-sufficient, but also super valuable to the people on the receiving end, to the people on your list, then you're not going to want to miss this course. As Joel Hook said, this is a lot of the other courses out there are pretty good for beginners, but this goes deep. This is all about high-level strategy for building a really solid, really great automated business. All right, now we are at the date filter. Date filter is a biggie. I will not be rushing through this one. So the date filter allows you to take a raw date object, which could be gotten from a custom field or from this special now object. And now is always going to represent the time that email is being sent or being processed. Not when you wrote the email, not when you added the liquid, but the time it's being sent. So if you have a custom field that is formatted to be a date or date time, or you want to access the special now property, which will always be right now when this email is being sent, then the date filter is going to let you transform that raw date time object into something more readable. Like I mentioned earlier, I would never email you and say, hey, come over on 2019-11-05. But I might say, hey, come on over on November 5th, right? So the date filter is going to let you do that. Now, in order for the date filter to work for custom field data, you need to ensure that it's formatted correctly. So under the surface, behind the scenes, what's being done is it's using something called Ruby's time parse method. Not to get too geeky technical with you, but what that means is that there are a set number of formats that the date filter is expecting. So it could be something like day, month, year, year, month, day. There's ISO formats that are weird that you'll probably never need to touch. You might, though, be working with an integration that sets data on a custom field that might store it in an ISO format, which is fine because time parse can work with that. You'd also get, time parse is actually pretty flexible. So you could do something like August 1st, and it would automatically assume August 1st of this year. So if you have that data within a custom field, then the date filter should be able to convert it into a date time object that it can work with. Now, for the fellow Americans watching this, if you're storing dates as month, day, year, you will run into issues. Let me repeat that. If you store, 3/1/2019, March 1st, 2019, you call date on that, and then you want it to be a pretty version of that date, you're going to get back January 3rd of 2019. So keep that in mind. Make sure you're using, I tend to use year, month, day. It's easier to sort because if you want to sort that, that's kind of the way that makes the most sense. But you could also do day, month, year, which is how the rest of the world, besides here in the US, tends to write dates. So what the date filter is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to transform this raw date time representation into whatever format you want. So if you want to say, Monday, the 15th of October, 2019, where you just want it to be concise, or you just want to show a time, or you just want to show how many days it's been this year, or what October 15th is in terms of days of the year, the date filter is going to allow you to do that. And the best resource for you to find out what the magic formula, because when you use the date formula, it's going to expect something like %D or %J or %Y or something like that, sometimes lowercase, sometimes uppercase. I've been working with Ruby's StringFTime is what's being used under the scenes for probably 13, 14 years now. And I still can't remember how it all works. So the best resource is a website called StringFTime or strftime.org. And what that website is it's a visual way of being able to piece together your date in exactly the way you want it to look. And then it will give you the % stuff that you will then use and paste into ConvertKit. So you'll use what it gives you to paste in the date filter, and then you can know that this is going to be formatted the way I want it to be formatted. So throughout the course, I'm going to be coming back to the date filter pretty often, not only for formatting, which is what most people think of the date filter for being good at, but also for doing things like date calculations. So how many days are between this day and that day, or whatever else. Date is going to allow us to do that. Super powerful filter, especially when we start doing math operations on top of it. So first, the filter. That will take either the first letter of an object, so the B in Brennan, or it will take the first object within a list or an array. So if you have red, green, blue, because you've split that by comma, and now you have that as an array, you call first, and that will give you red. And then there's last, exactly what you think it is. It's the opposite of first. Instead of red, green, blue coming back with red, green, blue will give you blue. Then there's plus. So plus will let you add to a number. And where this is going to be really useful is when you start doing things like plus 86,400. So what am I talking about with this? Well, one use of the date filter is going to be to convert a time into what's called a Unix timestamp. This is going to blow your mind if you haven't come across this before. But what that means is the Unix timestamp is the number of seconds that have elapsed since January 1st of 1970. So a lot of computers use this behind the scenes. And why it's useful is because if you take right now and you convert it to the number of seconds that have elapsed since January 1st, 1970, and then you add 86,400 to that, that will give me exactly what tomorrow at this time will be. And then I can take that and cast it as something human readable. So I can do that to add, what would 5 days from now be? What day would that be? And how can I then use that and show that in an email? Or what is right now? And if I add this to it, what is the difference of this and that? And how can I then send people who only have a few days to this sequence and people with a lot of days to that sequence? We're going to be using plus and minus and divided by and all these different fun date filters a lot throughout this course. In terms of actually outputting to an end user something, not a huge need to be able to ever probably show someone, especially if you're storing more raw data instead of numeric data as custom fields. But if you are doing things like, let's say you want to do lead scoring, and I cover this later in the course, you want to be able to increment a score every time something happens, you will use the plus filter to do that. Minus filter, I'm not going to rehash grade school math, but it's exactly what plus is, just subtraction instead of addition. Times is multiplication, so same deal. If you want to multiply some number and have that number be outputted, or maybe you want to say 86,400 times 5, so 5 days, that's a great way of doing that. The multiply filter is going to be the way to do that. Divided by, that's what you would expect. Division, I guess opposite of multiplication. Divided by will let you divide any object by whatever number you'd like. And then there's modulo. Modulo is a lot of fun. So what modulo lets you do is it will let you divide something by a number, and then it will get back the remainder, or it will return the remainder. So where this is useful, I'll talk about this later in the course, is if you want to give a random, say you want to generate a random number, which is what we'll use when we do A/B testing later on and so on. You want to put somebody to a random bucket, maybe either bucket 1, 2, or 3. Modulo is going to let us do that by looking at, say, the current timestamp, converting it to the number of seconds since 1970 through the date filter, and then calling modulo with 3, which will yield 0, 1, or 2. So 3 different options. Either that date, when I divide it by 3, comes back, it's completely divisible, so it comes back with 0, or it's divisible but has a remainder of 1, so that comes back with 1, or a remainder of 2. So if you want to do random number generation, then modulo is how we're going to do that. And again, I don't want to cover this too much now, but we will be digging into a lot with modulo. Our friend Modulo will be back many times throughout the rest of this course. All right, so that was output markup. So we just covered how to access properties on a subscriber object or the current date through the now object. And then we talked about ways of processing those properties through filters. We're going to shift gears now and talk about tag markup. Again, no relation to ConvertKit tags. It's just what the people who designed Liquid call it. So tag markup is going to let you conditionally display content to people based on whether something is truthy or true or not true. So the common example used here is checking to see if somebody has a tag. So in the official ConvertKit documentation, you see things like if subscriber.tags contains customer, then it'll have some text or something. And then there will be a endif. So curly brace % endif. So remember with tag markup, we're not actually emitting anything from the Liquid itself to the page. Instead, we're saying either yes or no, show this content that's after me. So the way we denote that is by having this curly brace %, which just means execute or interpret what I have in here, find out if it's true or false. And if it's true, then whatever is after me, I want you to show. So that's the easiest, clearest way to think about it. What it does is it allows you to ultimately do things like, if this is true, then do this. Else if that is true, then do this. Else, otherwise do that. So you can have really complex control flows, and you can have it so depending on where somebody's in your funnel or what tags they have or however you segmented them, you can then show really relevant copy to them using the control flows that come with tag markup. So what is truth? Truth from the perspective of Liquid is anything that is not false or anything that is not null or nil. Don't want you to think too hard about that yet, but what I want to make clear right now is an empty value, an empty string or an empty object. So a first name that is not set is going to come back as true for Liquid. So let me repeat that. If you have something that says if subscriber.firstname, then blah, 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 you might expect that if the first name is not there, then that wouldn't happen. So then you do that, and then you start questioning, why is all this stuff showing when it should only show if they have a first name? And the reason why it's showing is because, again, this is a Ruby thing. This isn't a ConvertKit thing. This isn't really even a Liquid thing. This is a Ruby thing, which is what ConvertKit and Liquid are written in. It's basically saying, hey, it's an empty string. It's text, but there's no text in it. That's still true. And then it processes it, and then you start questioning, why is it showing this? So the way that we're going to circumvent that is by using operators. So an operator is something that you compare a object to, so a first name object to, in order to determine, is this the same thing, or is it greater than or less than or whatever else? And then if it's true, you'll get back true. So you can say, is the first name not equal to blank or a blank string? And if that's true, then we want to do X, Y, and Z. So Liquid includes a number of different operators. You probably will only use a handful of these, but there's equals, which is the common one, and this is shown with 2 equal signs. So you never want to do equal, generally means assignment. So if you were to do something like object equal true or something like that, then you'd actually be setting that object to be true. This is a common, I know I mentioned Liquid's not a programming language, but it is very much reminiscent of one. So if you do that, if you just have one equal, and I see this happen all the time with people, it actually won't work. You need 2 equals to compare. So remember, 2 equals means compare. So does first name equal Bob? If that's true, and if it's identical, then we will get back, we'll run whatever happens next. We'll show whatever is shown next. Now, equals are fickle, right? So you might be thinking, well, I'm checking to see if first name equals Bob, but this person's Bob and it didn't work for them. Well, you need to make sure that it's identical. So if you're checking for Bob with a capital B and this person is Bob with no capital, well, that's going to come back and not do what you expect. So pop quiz, what do we do to fix that? Well, what I would do is I would probably do something like if subscriber.firstname space pipe space downcase, so now we're going to lowercase every first name, equals, quote, Bob with all lowercase, then do that. And that way it'll make all the Bobs in your database equal. So if any of them are named Bob, it doesn't matter how they capitalize it or whatever else, then whatever you want will execute. So there's equal for equals, and then there's exclamation point equal, which is not equals. So it's the complete opposite, right? So if it's not equal to Bob, so if Mary shows up or Tom shows up, then we want this to run. And then there's greater than and less than. So this is just the kind of gator mouth left, gator mouth right. Never really knew what to call these. I think in grade school we called it gator mouths. But this will just let you compare and check. Let's say you have a custom field of age and you want to say something like, if they're over 21, then do, whatever. You could use greater than or just the left gator sign. to do that. Same with less than. Now, caveat here is, well, if they're over 21, shouldn't that also be probably if they're over or equal to 21? So you could do just if they're over 20, and that would say 21, 22, 23, 50, and so on. That would all come back true. Or to make it more readable for you in the future, you could use greater than or equal. So alligator left, gator mouth, and then equals. And then what that would do is if you had greater than or equal to 21, it would say that would apply to people who are 21, but also 22 and 25 and 50 and so on. So it's up to you. I mean, greater than or equal to 21 or greater than 20 end up really being the same thing, but I tend to prefer greater than or equal to for it being very obvious what's happening. We also have less than or equal to, again, same deal, just the inverse of greater than or equal to. You can also use logical and or logical ors. So what that means is you can kind of chain together. You can say if subscriber.firstname equal Bob or subscriber.firstname equal Mary, if either are true, then whatever you want will run. So that can get a little hard to try to think through, like, okay, well, are both of these true, and in what circumstances might one be true or one be false? But all you need to know in terms of that are and means if you have, let's say you have subscriber.firstname equals Mary and subscriber.firstname equals Bob, that will never run. That will never be true because you cannot have a first name that's both Mary and Bob that are both true on either end that are also true from the and perspective, right? Does that make sense? So you can't have somebody named Mary and Bob simultaneously. So that and condition there will make it so that never actually can be possible. Now an or condition would, because if it's either Mary or Bob, if either of those are true, then we'll let whatever happens next happen. And the way that Liquid interpolates is from right to left. So if you're doing something like an or condition, it will check the rightmost thing you have first. And if that's true, then it will basically stop and just continue on. So the rightmost thing always takes precedence. Again, something you probably don't need to concern yourself with all that much, but it's helpful, I think, just knowing how it actually figures out what's true, and then if it's true, what to do from then. All right, so now I'd like to shift gears. We're still in the context of tag markup. So I've so far been talking about if. So if this, then do whatever. If is technically what's called a control flow. So Liquid ships or includes a number of different control flows. The one that most people usually start with is if, but there's also unless, which is the opposite of if. So we're actually looking for false. I find it a little hard to kind of grasp that sometimes, where you basically need to mentally reverse whatever's happening. And if that's true, then do whatever. So if is what I typically encourage you to use. You could use unless. It's kind of like playing the don't pass line in a game of craps. It's something you probably shouldn't do. Kind of is a little awkward, and from a pragmatic and practical point of view, I find it mentally hard to wrap my head around. So if and then unless are control flows. We also have the ability to, if you have an if or you start with an unless, you can do an if else. So this is IFELS, not IFELSE or IF space ELSE. It's IFELS. And this is allows you to have a secondary way of kind of looking for truthiness, and then outputting something based off that. And then there's also else. So let me try to make this kind of clear if you haven't done this kind of logical flow stuff before. So imagine that you have a subscriber who goes into the top. If you've ever seen the game show Price is Right, they put the little puck at the top and then it hits these little pegs and it kind of goes either left or right and left and right and left and right all the way to the bottom. Think about it like that. So, what's going to happen is if it says if first name equals Mary, and that is true, it will do whatever is after that, and then it'll stop. It'll then look for the end if and then continue on with the email. So we're looking for, does first name equal Mary? If so, cool, do this. If it's false, if the first name is not Mary, and then the next thing that we have is an else if before the end if. So we can do elses and else ifs before we close our end or our if statement, if this makes sense. So, we check to see if her name's Mary. No, cool. Next one might say else if first name equals Bob. No, false. Okay, let's keep going. Else if first name equals Jane. No. All right, keep going. And then we can have an else, which is kind of a catch-all. Else, if we get to else, this is always going to happen. So if none of the things above it end up being true, the else is going to be what actually ends up happening. So a common pattern for this might be something like, let's say you want to have a dynamic offer. So you want to include something maybe in an email that will point people to, the next thing that they should buy from you or something like that. You might say, I want to start to check, are they a premium customer? If so, I want them to go to my mastermind retreat. Else if, are they just maybe a normal customer? If so, I want to get them to be a premium customer. Else if, are they, have they attended a webinar? Yes, cool. I want them to now buy my things and now they can become a customer. And the else, the fallback could just be, hey, I want you to go to my webinar. So that's an example of kind of the control flow that you would be able to get with if, else if, and else, along with unless if you're into that kind of stuff. There's also the ability to use case statements or switch statements, as they're often called, within Liquid. So this is a more structured way of pivoting off a specific object and saying, if it's this, do that. If it's that, do this, and so on and so forth. So for instance, let's say you have a industry custom field and there could be 4 or 5 possible values. So you have retail, finance, nonprofit, government, let's say those are the 4 different things that we can put somebody in. We can use a case statement to say case subscriber.industry, and then when retail, then give the story about retail people. When finance, then give the story about finance people. When nonprofit, give the nonprofit story. So it's just it's a more terse way of being able to do the same thing that you could do with an if subscriber.industry equals retail, then do this. Else if subscriber.industry equals finance, then do that. Else if subscriber.industry equals nonprofit, then do that. It's just a more shorthand way of being able to achieve that same thing. If you find yourself using the same value again and again, you might want to look into assign. So what assign does is think of it as kind of like a custom field that is only available within the scope of that email. So let's say you want to do that whole like lowercase the first name and then capitalize the first letter thing, and you want to use that name again and again and again. Now you could just do that anytime you want to include the first name. You could just do, at the top of the email, midway through, maybe at the end, and do the whole down case and then capitalize filter chain. But you might just want to do that once. So you can use assign, which will let you basically store a variable for the context of this email. So you could say like assign capitalized first name equals subscriber.firstname pipe downcase pipe capitalize. And that will store in the capitalized first name field the capitalized version of the name. So then all I need to do is, instead of doing later on like, hey, subscriber.firstname, I would instead just do, hey, capitalized first name, and then blah, 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 blah. So capitalized first name. What do you think of blah, blah, blah? In closing, capitalized first name, blah, blah, blah. So you're able to kind of reuse that variable again and again without needing to keep doing that same thing, which is helpful if you ever want to, if you use it a ton in that one email, you don't want to, if you update how you do it or you change something, you don't want to remember to change all the different things. Now keep in mind that's only within the scope of that one email. So if you want to do this more kind of universally, you might want to think about having a glossary automation or something that will handle this for you, where it will say when first name is set, downcase it, then capitalize it, and then set it back on the first name field. And that way your first names will always be kind of clean and always have that formatting that you want. Now, if you want to do something even more complicated than assign, you can use capture, which capture is like, it's similar to tag markup in that it's here we're starting out and then we have a bunch of stuff and then we're doing an end. It's very similar to that, except what it's going to do is it's going to store whatever data comes through. And this could be, you could have multiple liquid things going on. You could have some normal text and then some more liquid stuff and so on and so forth. All that will then get stored into a variable, which you could then use elsewhere. So this is useful if you want to go beyond just a simple get a first name and then do some filters and that's it. But you want to do something a little more complicated, maybe some if-else stuff. You can then store that into a capture variable and then use that elsewhere. You can also iterate through lists or arrays with Liquid. So imagine that you're doing what I tell you to do and you're naming your tags the way that I think you should name them. And you end up having a bunch of namespaced purchased tags. So purchased -A, purchased -B, purchased -C, and so on. Imagine that you get to the point where you have an email that you're sending out and you want to show somebody everything they bought. Maybe that's a thing you want to do. One way you could do that would be to use a series of if control flow tags. So you could do something like, if they are tagged as purchased A, then say you've bought A. Else, if they have, or not else, but if they also have the tag purchase B, then say you've bought B, and so on and so forth. You could use iteration, though, to be able to do something like this. You could say, loop over all the tags, find just the ones that are purchased tags, and then for each of these tags, strip out the purchase stuff, so it's just the name of the product, and then spit that out to the person. So you could do something like, loop over all so say you have a big catalog of products and you're very good with your naming. You could loop over all those, filter it out to just the purchase tags, and then spit out hey, thank you for being a customer. You bought this, and this for me. You can do that really simply with a iteration loop within Liquid. Now, to be honest, I've seen very few people who have actually ever needed to do iteration within Liquid. So it's probably not that big of a deal for you. I'm just wagering or guessing here. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I just wanted, again, just to be thorough, I wanted to mention that this is something that is technically doable within Liquid. All right, so we've talked about output markup. So I've showed you how to take data from a subscriber, maybe post-process it a bit, and then stick it into an email. We also talked about control flows or tag markup. So you can do things like, if this is true, show this text, otherwise show that text, and so on and so forth. I want to shift gears and talk a bit about some of the fun things that you can achieve through a lot of what I just covered. And again, I'm going to be digging deep into strategy and what to do and how to use this stuff throughout the rest of the course. But I thought it would just be interesting to show you a few different things that you could do using what I just taught. All right, so say you have a name field, and this name could be first, middle, last, or something like that. You want to get their first name. Well, what could you do? Well, there's actually two ways that you could get the first name. One of which could be you call subscriber.firstname, then space pipe, space split by spaces, which will now return a list or an array with first name, middle name, last name if they've given you all three. And then you can call first, and that will give you the first object. So that will give you Brennan, if it's Brennan Joseph Dunn. And the second way you could do it would be through Truncate Words. So Truncate Words, by default, remember, will take the first or the third or however many words you want to keep, and then add 3 periods to the end of it, 3 dots, ellipses. So what you could do is you could do subscriber.name, space pipe, space truncate words, :1, comma, quote, which will make it so there are no ellipses. And that'll just take the first word and spit that back out. Let's say you want to show a personalized offer or a specific PS or something, depending on where somebody is in your funnel. I cover all this stuff later on in the course. I get deep into this, but to give you a little preview, you could use a case statement to be able to do something like, if they, like I talked about before, if their customer pitched them on this If they're just a webinar attendee, pitch them on that. If they haven't done anything, pitch them on this. So it's a great way using these case statements to be able to effectively show different relevant offers depending on where somebody is. So what somebody's done with you, where they're in your funnel, or maybe even how they're segmented. Let's say you want to call out anyone who spent over $1,000 on you. We could do something like, if subscriber.lifetime value is greater than or equal to 1,000, then blah, hey, thanks for being an awesome customer. I'd love to send you a little Christmas card. Go to this Typeform link and I'll give me your address and I'll send you something in the mail. So that's a really great way to just kind of reward people. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting purchase data as a exposed field, a lifetime value field into ConvertKit, which again, I cover all that kind of stuff later on in the course. But this is a kind of a really cute and creative way to use the greater than or equal to operator to basically just call out your best customers. Say you want to get a random number between 1 and 3. So roll the dice. You want to just spit out a random number, or more likely what you want to do is you want to assign as a custom field value some random number to put somebody in a group, either group 1, group 2, or group 3. Again, maybe you're doing some A/B testing or something like that. The way you would do that is to get the now object, so now, and then space pipe, space date, colon, space quote, percent lowercase s. So that's going to give you the number of seconds since 1970, and then space modulo, colon 3, which will, again, divide that number by 3, and then get back either 0 if it's a clean divide, 1 if there's a remainder of 1, or 2 if there's a remainder of 2. Now we might even want to go a step further and have another filter where we add +1. So space pipe, space plus colon 1, which will now, instead of 0, 1, 2, will give you 1, 2, and 3. And then again, you can use that return value however you'd like. So this is a great way to be able to bucket people into different groups in a totally random way. So what if you'd like to show somebody the number of days that are left in the year? Well, now, space pipe, space date, colon, space quote, %j, lowercase j, quote, which will give you the number of days for right now, the day number of the year. So if this is the 100th day of the year, it'll return 100. And then space pipe, space minus colon 365, which will subtract 365 from that, right? So now we've got some negative number. And then we can do space pipe, space times, colon, space -1, which will make that a positive number. So that if it's 100th day of the year, we'll subtract 365 from it, which will give us -265. We then multiply it by -1, and now we are at positive 265. And then we can say, hey, you better, focus on your goals. There are only 265 days of the year left, or something like that. So it's a great way to be able to do, especially for automated emails, where these emails could be going out at any given time. It's a really fun way to be able to show somebody how much time is left in the year. So where can you use Liquid? Well, you can use Liquid within ConvertKit's broadcast email editor. You can also use Liquid within email templates. So this is useful if you want to have a newsletter template where you want to have a personalized PS thing. And again, I cover this all in the course, but you want to be able to show somebody a tailored PS just for them. You would add this to the email template that you'll use for your newsletters. So then any emails that you write with that template will have that personalized PS. So it works in the broadcast emails, the email templates, along with sequence emails. You can add it there. You can also use it when setting custom field values within automations. So if you have an automation with one of the steps is setting a custom field value, the value of that step can be Liquid. So this is useful if you want to do something like transform input value, like Mary, that could be all lowercase, all uppercase, or whatever else, into something consistent like capital M Mary. All right, so Liquid, just to close things up, Liquid is super powerful. So much you can do with it. A lot of people are only really scratching the surface. And my goal in this lesson was not to give you a strategic overview of here's how you should use Liquid, and here's how doing this can yield that result, or whatever else. The entire rest of the course is dedicated to that. My goal was to just give you kind of a crash course on what Liquid is, how it works, what are filters, what is output markup, what's tag markup, what are control flows, and all these different things that I'll be referencing throughout the course, so that hopefully when you're getting to later lessons where you need to do something and I'm saying, well, set up some liquid that does X, Y, and Z, that you're not scratching your head thinking, what the heck is liquid and what does it do and how does it work and so on. So that's my goal for this lesson. I know it was a big one. I know it was a lot of new stuff, especially if you're not traditionally a programmer and liquid has always seemed like black magic or voodoo to you, but hopefully this has been helpful.